Hear me?
We can hear you. That's great.
Okay.
Okay, you are good to call it to order.
This is Stanley Green, Chair of the Historic Preservation Commission of the City of College Place, and I call to order the March 18, 2021 meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission. And I'll start with the roll call. Commissioner Terrell Gottschall has an excused absence. Gary Peterson.
Here.
Mike Denny.
Present.
Edward Kontz.
Present.
Thank you. All right. So the consent agenda, approving the consent agenda means approving the draft minutes from February 19 and the
One moment, you need to note who is also present. So John Rickard, Community Development Director, is present. Christy Sugar, Community Development Administrative Assistant, is present. Carolyn Holm, Deputy City Clerk, is present. And we also have with us Bernard Hausen present. I'm not sure of your company name, so.
Western
Washington University.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Stanley, go ahead.
Thank you. All right, so approving the consent agenda would constitute approving the draft agenda for today as presented and the draft minutes from our meeting, which I believe was actually February 18. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Okay, thank you. All right, do we have any public comment requests?
The clerk's department did not receive any. John?
I did not receive any either.
Okay, so the next item is election of officers for the Historic Preservation Commission. And Gary Peterson has offered to be a candidate for chair. Are there any other nominations or volunteers for that position? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to appoint Gary Peterson as chair of this commission.
So
So
moved.
move.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Is okay, any discussion? All right, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, well, that's unanimous. So Gary, if you don't mind, Gary, I'll finish this item and then hand the gavel over to you immediately after this item. For vice chair, Commissioner Gottschall has offered to hold that position. Are there any other nominations or volunteers for the position of vice chair? Okay, hearing none, I'll accept a motion to appoint Commissioner Gottschall as vice chair of the commission.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so with that, I will now symbolically hand the gavel over to our new chair, Gary Peterson.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yeah. You'll have to bear with me as we struggle through this. I have not chaired anything like this before. And is the next item that we should be discussing here on the agenda on the screen?
It is the ground
Okay.
penetrating radar.
might need to find a way to enlarge this so that I can read it easier.
How about that? Does that work?
Oh, thank you.
You're
That
welcome.
helped. Yes. So let's see. Am I looking at this new subject, the Poor Farm Cemetery radar survey? And is that why the gentleman from the university is here to discuss with us, Bernard?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, maybe I should turn it over to Bernard and see what he has to tell us about this next item.
Alrighty, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me out here and for this really interesting opportunity. So I have a PowerPoint that I'll fire up if I can get my share screen to work, which I think I should. And if at any point anybody has any questions, please feel free to just ask them. And this should be pretty short. So we'll have some questions at the end too, I'm sure. So let's start this up here. Here we go. So you should be seeing a PowerPoint slide with the title and my name and everything. Okay,
Yep.
great.
Yes, I see it.
All right, so I'm Bernie Hausen. Thanks again for having me out here virtually. I'm a professor at the Western Washington University Geology Department. I'm also the department chair. And my specialty is in geophysics. So I've, been working with this type of equipment for, 20 odd years. So this is going to be, kind of a fun experience. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about, the basics of how this ground penetrating radar works. And I want to show you some examples of a project that I did for a different cemetery out here in Linden, Washington, just to get for you to understand and get a feel for how the data look. And then just briefly talk about the plan for the Poor Farm Cemetery site that you have. This is the, there we go. Now, why did that switch to a different image or not?
No.
I still see the same image.
Yeah, so my double screen thing is not cooperating. So let me.
It's a wonder any of it works.
Yeah.
Bernard, do you have any special features that for transitioning from one slide to the next? Or is
I
it just
shouldn't.
straight? Sometimes that can slow down.
Yeah, I think what I'm going to do is work it from my laptop screen. So we see the same thing here, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Except now there's a number of small boxes on the left in addition to the.
Next slide.
Yeah, it's just showing the outline. Okay, so we switched over to a new slide.
Yep.
All right, good. So we'll just go with this. So ground penetrating radar, essentially it's microwave frequency radar that's pulsed from an antenna into the ground and then received back again. The idea is that whenever there's a change in the electrical or magnetic properties of whatever's below the surface, that's going to reflect the radar wave back. And then the time that it takes to, travel out and return is recorded. That's how we estimate depth. And then the intensity of the reflection can also tell you some information about the contrast in those properties. So when there's a very large contrast, you'll get a high amplitude of a reflected wave. All right. The rule of thumb with the GPR is that the resolution and depth that you can investigate with is a function of the frequency of the antenna. For surveys like this, where we're looking at fairly shallow objects, less than 10 feet deep. We're going to use a 350 megahertz radar antenna. And if you're familiar at all with the electromagnetic spectrum, we overlap into some of the Wi-Fi and cell phone and other kinds of frequency ranges there too. So it's lower frequency than 5G, which is more in the news, but it's the same kind of deal. And this is a picture of basically the same unit that we have. So the antenna is this little box, and it has a little control unit, and we just run the thing along the ground. This slide is showing two ways in which the data are can be looked at. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but basically these little wiggly lines would be the amplitude of the reflected radar waves. So, and the vertical axis here is travel time. So it's the amount of time measured in nanoseconds, because these are radar waves and they travel close to the speed of light. So these travel into under the ground, and each little squiggle is a reflection of something that's different in the subsurface. So in order to make these images more interpretable, what we do is we take a color scale. So this figure on the right shows that. We call this a radargram. And this little pattern of colors here on the right is how we're translating the reflected amplitude into a color. So the black colors are places where there's very little reflectivity, like a low amplitude. And the really bright white color and this kind of weird pink color, it's a very intense reflection. So like these ones here. So this is showing right here an object that has a very high contrast in its properties and is making a very prominent radar reflection. This is actually from a buried 55-gallon steel drum. So it's another one of the common applications of GPR is you look for underground, buried storage tanks and things like that.
So would the tank in this instance be laying on its side with the bottom not reflecting in white?
It's hard to tell. So from one scan, so from one line, it could be laying on its side, it could be sitting upright. And so we would have to have companion scans, on either side to see what the dimensions of the object would be. And then the width of this reflection is also going to be, kind of a function of the size of the object. Okay, Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this is a quick example. On campus, we have some brick paths when they've put some little time capsules in there with the graduating year. And so this is just an image showing that we're able to image, little cement walls that are, a few inches thick, and we can resolve the brick surface of the sidewalk and things like that using these antennas. So they're fairly sensitive. Okay, so here's what this looks like for a cemetery. So one of the cemeteries that I've worked on is the Greenwood Cemetery. It's part of Whatcom Cemetery District 10. It's located in Washington. And they have an older section of the cemetery, which is this area here, kind of surrounded by the trees, where they have incomplete records of the burials. And what the commissioners of Cemetery District 10 wanted to know are, whether there were unmarked burials in cemetery lots that had no markers, or to verify, that there were actual burials where markers are occurring. So for this project, what we did is we did the ground penetrating radar surveys all along the lines, how the cemetery is laid out. And I'll have a map of those lines later on showing you the overall results of the study. So here's an example, and I included some text. It's too much text for a slide, so I'll just give you a quick summary. The cemetery here is organized into sections that they call lots. And within each lot, are several plots, grave sites. And the grave sites are lettered A through F usually, and the lots are numbered. So this is lot number 95. These are the radar data below, okay? So you can see we have these 3 prominent GPR reflections under the ground, and they correspond to 3 marked gravestones. So here we're able to verify that there are people buried where the grave marks in plot A, B, and plot E and F were a couple, and the older burial is in F. And so you can see there's this reflection right here, but it's a lot weaker. So we tend to see that the more modern burials, within the last 30 years or so, have much more prominent reflections, and older burials have less prominent reflections. The other thing we learned from this lot is that the two sites, or the grave sites C and D, which had no markers, didn't seem to have any reflection. And so we would say that these were unmarked, but also vacant. Okay.
Pardon me, but you said they had headstones there. That would be above ground, so that would not show on this image. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. And so we run kind of adjacent. We ran these kind of adjacent to the headstones.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Another example. I included this one because this has burials that were from the 1910s and 1920s, and also included an infant burial. And so these are what some of the radar reflections look like when we have older or smaller burials. So in this case, we were able to identify burials in plot A, plot B, a small one that was marked as an infant in plot C. And then over here in plots D, E, and F, we have a continuous sediment layer that, again, is showing that we don't have good evidence that there was a burial there.
Again, if I could ask, this sediment layer is also the same color that spikes up and down on the infant burial and the other two. So might it be that we're not actually seeing evidence of the body or casket or anything, but just a disturbance in the sediment layer?
Well, so we're seeing a disturbance in the sediment layer, but you see these kind of upside down or hyperbolas. So that pattern of a reflection.
Okay.
Yeah, so that pattern is produced when we have an object that isn't horizontally continuous. So that's primarily what we're looking for.
Thank you.
And then this is just a different example of a longer set of data. So this has data from a couple of lots and showing that we have clear evidence of the burials and things like that. So for this Greenwood Cemetery, do you have a question?
Bernard, are you analyzing these images, or do you have a program that analyzes them?
Well, so they're recorded, they're analyzed using a program, but you have to review and adjust for depth, and you have to also pick a transform of those radar reflections into a color scheme that highlights what you're interested in finding, and then you go through and we have to position each survey and get the distance and compare that with the map. So that's where the analysis comes into play.
Thank you.
So Bernard, I'm just really curious. The average depth of any burial is what, 2.5 meters, 2 meters?
Somewhere in there, and that's to the bottom of the hole.
Okay.
So we commonly, see the, and when I started working with cemeteries, that also kind of threw me a little bit. I was expecting, everything should be 6 feet under, but that's the bottom of the hole.
Right.
So we see, evidence of the reflection a couple feet higher than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question. Is the vertical axis on this image linear? In other words, it is a straight line depth going down?
Oh, that's a good question. In this case, the answer would be no. So I haven't tried to adjust the velocity of the different layers because we weren't really interested in knowing the exact depth beneath the surface, just whether or not there was somebody buried there. But yes, you do have a difference in material. So if you have a artificial fill layer, soil, and then you have natural soil, they're going to have different radar velocities. And so the relationship between the travel time and the depth will be slightly different.
So one more question. Compaction of the ground, does that read different than if it was not as compacted?
Yeah, we would see that. And so
Okay.
what I would expect for compacted ground is, like in this example, we see a really nice surface layer that's pretty uniform, horizontal all across the site. So if you have some material that's on top that's been compacted, been there for a while, I would expect to see this nice continuous layer across.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so for the Greenwood project, this is kind of the end result that we gave them. In this case, the project was a little simpler because we knew, the cemetery was there, laid out, so I could run the radar lines perpendicular to each of the plots, and that's going to give us the best chance of picking up the reflections of each burial that's present. This is color coded, so red means that we have a marker with radar confirmation that there's a body buried there. Green would be an unmarked plot with no evidence of a burial. And so the Cemetery District 10 folks were particularly interested in knowing how many of those sites they had, because apparently they have to maintain an inventory of available graves, and they wanted to know how many would be available in some of these older cemeteries.
And based on this map, they'd be able to tell where they could dig a new grave to bury a new body.
Exactly. Yeah. It turns out it was a pretty complicated process, because if you want to claim or reclaim a grave site, you have to post a little legal notice on each grave site you want to reclaim. I remember right, it was for a period of either 2 or 3 years. And so after we did these reports, if you went to visit one of these 2 cemeteries, there'd be all these little, plastic laminated legal notices stuck on every one of those green plots, indicating that the cemetery district was going to repossess, take ownership again to use the plot.
Unless someone could prove that there's somebody in their past had paid for that plot and they were still intending to use it.
Exactly. That's what the purpose of the legal notice. So if somebody had reserved the plot, they could step forward and say, yeah, we still intend to do that. Yeah. So the other one, so the yellow is a place where we have a grave marker, but no evidence of anything buried there. And that's actually quite common. You'd see a husband and wife grave, and one of them has the death date and the other death date is blank. And then the blue is a place where there's no marker, but we found evidence that there's somebody buried there.
So those you would not put a notice on,
Right.
You'd just leave it the way it was.
Yeah, and then try and find out who might possibly be buried there. It turns out some of these records are fairly incomplete.
So that's a question I had. So for this cemetery, for example, I presume they had some records that would have said that this family bought this plot or this person had been buried there at this time or whatever. But are you saying that this was to audit those records to see how accurate they are?
Well, to do that, but also in some cases, the records are incomplete enough that the folks who are managing the cemetery just had no idea. The other cemetery I did, a larger one in downtown Linden, it was set up and run by the Masons, and then it was taken over by the county, I think in the 1940s or something like that. But when it changed hands, there was a kind of a big hiatus in the records. And what the cemetery district folks said is that it really depends on the conscientiousness of the the caretaker over a period of years. So some kept very good records and some kept rather poor records.
Okay, thank you.
That's called a sextant?
I think so. I don't know if they use that same title.
Hmm.
Okay, so now let's look at the site. So this is I think I got this from Google Earth. So this is the cemetery site. All I've done here is just put in little lines where we would propose to collect the GPR data. The challenge with this location is going to be that, we don't know how the cemetery was laid out unless we can find an old air photo or a sketch or something. So we need to do a very thorough job and scan basically every inch of this place in order to be sure that we find, maximize our chances of finding the graves that we know are there. In fact, I think what we're probably going to do is not only do the east-west set of transects, but do north-south transects as well. And then our software can mesh those all together into a 3D map. And so we'd be able to lay the radar reflections right on this image, in addition to seeing them in the kind of cross sections that I showed you for the other cemetery. So the disadvantage is we don't know the layout of the cemetery. The advantage is that it looks like it's a pretty clear site, which is what we want for these kind of surveys.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So I assume you're aware that Walla Walla 2020 did some research on this. They created the sign that's at that cemetery listing the known the names that are known of those who are buried there. And I was wondering whether you checked with them as to see whether any of the records they consulted had any information about the layout of the burials.
Yeah, I haven't done that, but that's a good next step, is to find whatever we can about the historic layout of the site.
This is Mike. I did learn in research for the book I'm pretty much done with, is that the last burial there was in 1942. And I don't know where in the cemetery it was placed, but there's a considerable number of bodies in this cemetery, close to 700.
Wow. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, is how well known is the total number of, so 700 plus or minus is.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's considerably, I suspect it expands considerably, a larger area than what we currently have there.
Yeah. Would it be worthwhile to survey there's the, what does that say? Sandpiper Lane?
Yeah, now, is that the, you can penetrate and see if there's anything under the pavement as well?
Oh yeah, pavement's fine.
I don't know the specific history, but I'm not sure that there's a reason to be confident that Sandpiper Lane was laid out with precise knowledge of where the edge of any burials might have been.
I'm thinking there may well be burials under that pavement, perhaps. But do we need to get are those private streets rather than public streets? Do we need to get permission from anyone to do that?
They're public roads.
I'd say let's have them go ahead and include what's there in the street as well as what's in the green grass of the cemetery.
Yeah, that's easy enough to do. So if there's a possibility that folks might be buried under that road.
Yeah, as Mike said, we don't really know where they were, but could be.
Yeah.
But under the houses.
Well, from what I've read about this cemetery is that it was a distance from the main sanitarium and the house, the big facility they lived in. And it stretched a fair distance to the west of those buildings. So I'm going to guess that it's a much larger, I wouldn't be surprised, but it's under the street, clear up to Mockingbird and probably a little beyond.
So are those houses on slab or do they have a basement?
They're mobile homes, so they're on pillar and post.
Okay.
They're not permanently foundationed. There is a creek, I think, just on the northwest corner of what we're looking at. So it'll be interesting to see what you find.
Yeah.
I don't know if that creek's been redirected when they built the court or not.
Well, that's Stone Creek, and it was moved, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So
when you get there, you can see this is a little bit higher than what the pavement is at. So, but out of curiosity and wanting to be thorough, if we can look under the pavement there, I think maybe now's the time to do it.
Yeah, no, it would be pretty easy to include that. So, yeah, I guess the only other thing is we need to make sure that any cars were off the site for a couple hours while that was done.
Would it be possible for the city to post notices in advance that parking would be temporarily prohibited during certain times?
Yeah, we can coordinate that with Public Works to have some barricades put up there. It's not a very heavily used road, so.
Yeah, I think there's only 6 houses on it, so.
As long as we can allow access into the driveways of the residences that are there, it'll be fine.
Yeah, so we collect the data basically as fast as you can walk it. So I think in this case, to minimize any disruption of the folks who live there, we would just do the road right away, and then that would release, that wouldn't have to be blocked off anymore.
Okay. One other question. If I'm just thinking of the infrastructure that's probably buried under those streets as well, you'll be able to differentiate that from potential grave sites?
Well, that could be tricky, right? So we would want to know, what you all know about the infrastructure. There's going to be water connections, sewer connections, and things like that. They should all show up in little lines that where they would put one of the houses or where a meter is, or where the storm drain is. So if you have that mapped out in a GIS or something, we can use that information to compare with the data that we'll get, and then that would help address that uncertainty.
Okay.
Yeah, they will definitely show up in similar ways.
All right.
Fascinating.
So, John, I just have a question. Is it possible to do Southeast Mockingbird as well?
I think anything is possible. I don't know how much more time that would take, and
Okay.
what was
Now, because
included in the proposal.
everything I read in research was that it was mostly out west of the sanitarium that was there and the house that was there.
Mhm.
So,
Well, I mean, I think what would be good is if you have an idea of where you might want to expand this area, just sketch that out on a map and send it to me, and then we'll figure out how to get it done.
okay. Well,
I'm thinking Sandpiper and then this little kind of a parking area right there where the sign is located. Exactly. I think if we could cover that, and we should be able to do it easily. I just think they probably wouldn't have wanted to have been digging graves where there's going to be really wet ground.
right.
And so that it might just be very dense. I don't know. If as you go down the west side of Sandpiper and you're getting what you think are half graves and more extending to the west where Mike thinks they might be, then I don't know.
So one thing I read this winter was that frequently in poor farm cemeteries, they double buried. So there was one grave on top of another. And that was not uncommon. So there may in fact be more than one coffin in each plot.
If there's even a coffin.
Yeah, if there is a coffin.
Yeah. Well, the good news about that is that would make it something easier to, reflect the radar waves off of.
Okay. All right.
Would the GPR distinguish between a single burial and a double burial in one plot?
Probably not, unless they were separated by, a decent amount of material.
You mean vertically separated?
Vertically separated.
Okay.
John, do you know what the legal implications would be if burials were discovered under the public street?
No.
Okay.
I'm not a lawyer, but in terms of the boundaries of the cemetery, we are going to have it surveyed by, I believe, Anderson Perry. I am working on getting a PO approved. So at least we'll know where the boundaries are of the cemetery, the legal boundaries are, and we'll need to stay on our property, of course, so we can do what we want to in the public streets. But from what I'm understanding, we won't know until the data is analyzed. For instance, if we're along the east and north property boundaries,
Yeah.
Once you analyze the data, you might have a pretty good indication if there's a body that's crossing the property line.
Yeah, or under a corner of one of the houses or something. And, I don't think we want to disturb anything like that if we can help it.
So I have an etiquette question for you. So, what should I tell folks if they're asking me what I'm doing out there?
Well, actually, this meeting is, being broadcast on YouTube, so it's not a secret. It's
Yeah, I know it's not a secret, but
Yeah.
I think that you can tell them that you're doing.
We're doing the old Poor Farm Cemetery.
Yep. Yeah.
Surveying the old cemetery, exactly.
Yeah. No, actually, I believe that Steve Wheeler, the park manager, is probably viewing this meeting right now on YouTube. Just so, we want to be public about it and not straightforward about it.
Yeah.
I have a question. So does the GPR only measure directly straight down, or is there some horizontal spread of what it discerns?
Oh yeah, the radar waves spread out in a cone shape actually, and so if I go back to, I want to go back, let's just go back to this one. So see this hyperbola shape right here?
Yep.
Let's see if this will work. I picked a different color, but I'm going to make a little box right here and one right here. So when the antenna is right over the top of the grave, the travel time from the antenna down and back up is going to be the smallest, right? Because it's straight up and down.
Smallest, that means less depth.
Yes, shallowest.
Right. Okay.
So let's suppose the radar is over here. So the radar waves are going out like this. So they're bouncing back to here, but some of them are going to travel and hit this one. And so right here would be a path. So this hyperbola shape is due to that spreading out.
So,
Not that.
so it's a cone and it's just crossing over from where each of the radar unit, wherever it is.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And you don't have any adjustment for azimuth of your transmitted signal, I take it?
No, that's all set up by the internal, configuration of the transmitter and the receiver. For this particular one, it's the cone is 90 degrees front to back, and it's 60 degrees side to side.
Okay.
So my follow-up question is, let's say you're running the instrument along the eastern perimeter of the property. You're just inside the city property along the eastern perimeter. If there were burials to the east of the eastern property line, is it possible that this might discern that?
Yeah, they'll spread out a little bit. So yeah, we'll get a little bit of information from, just off of the line where we run the radar.
When we're looking at this, if I understand right, we're seeing the hyperbole or the bump where there is something reflecting back, but there's no way of this being able to trace out straight lines. In other words, we won't be able to look at an overhead map and see a rectangle where one grave is.
Wow, that made a mess there. Let's see if I can just get rid of that. So that's what the 3D bit is going to be about. So what that will do is it'll allow us to have basically a raster image of those cross sections. And so I would anticipate we would actually be able to see, little rectangles, however they're oriented, really.
Right.
So
I think they're going east-west. You
Yeah,
can
I
see
did.
them in some aerial images. You probably would be able to see them if you didn't have all those lines on that.
If you're on the site, you can see that the rectangular, they are east to west.
yeah.
So
So that's another reason why we'll do lines that go this way as well.
okay.
Good.
Very good.
Now, Bernard, the surveying company said that they would leave some, or they would set some control points that you could tie into. Will that be helpful?
Yeah, that would be super helpful. So I'm just gonna, let's just pretend that's their control point. So we would be able to measure we would have the distance from that point to the start of each of the lines that we do. And that's how we'll take our data and be able to put it back on this map.
So your lines, we can run clear over to the gutter to the south and to the gutter to the west, correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
So they could go like that and
Yeah.
like that.
right. Okay. Well,
Like
this
mowing lawn.
this is going to be very interesting because no one really knows the layout or where all those 700 graves are. So this will be an eye opener.
Well, we should be able to find them.
Yeah.
700, that does seem like a lot. Any idea, just as comparison, how many are in Mount Hope Cemetery?
I do not know.
I just wondered.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And you have to understand who was buried here. It was not just the citizens of that sanitarium or the house there. It was anyone that was found dead in Walla Walla County and they had no idea who they were. This was Boot Hill. They all went there. And so it was transients. It was folks that died from whatever cause they found. And they had no idea who a lot of them were. So they ended up here.
Yeah.
So I look at the list of folks from the poor farm. That was only a portion of who ended up in this cemetery.
Hmm.
Mike, do you know the date of the first burial?
About 1882 or 3.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Bernard, there are, we believe there were cylinders that were cast, concrete cylinders, and I think some of them have had the numbers scratched in the top of them, but any of those that were present at some point, I think when the park was developed, were the park was bladed, I guess, is what I've been told. And a lot of those were buried. Will you be able to locate those concrete cylinders, or will they just show up as like a rock?
Well, how big were they?
Not quite the size of a coffee can. There are a couple at the site that you'll be able to see when you get there.
Yeah, if they're not buried, 5 or 6 feet deep, we should be able to pick those up. But yeah, I mean, they'll look like a rock. So if there are other rocks,
You won't
And there may
find
be
many stones in that soil at all.
it just dirt.
Yeah, it's just soil. That's it.
so is it more sandy, clayey?
It's loess.
Okay.
Loam. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's silt losses,
Yeah.
all depositional material from the Missoula floods.
Well, that's good. So then if we do find something like that, then it's going to be one of those cylinders.
Right.
Is there a sprinkler system?
Good question.
I think there is.
Yeah, I would guess there is.
So we'll see all those pipes and the sprinkler heads too.
I don't know that there is because I've seen them running hoses out there.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's maintained by the park.
Right.
There was an agreement, I believe, when the park was developed. I think they were allowed to count that as part of their open space if the park owners agreed to maintaining it.
There used to be a playground on top of this that was set up there.
The swing set, I think.
Correct. And it was removed.
Mhm. There used to be fragments of headstones here and there, but most of them were leaning up against the tree. So horses and livestock wouldn't step on them. Not
Yeah.
necessarily where there was any grave.
Yep.
Those
It
are
was-
still there, but they're now set in concrete.
And it's mowed and green, so, yeah. Did you have anything else, Bernard?
That's it for me. I mean, I think the next is just to figure out when to do the survey and, you know, how to pick the dates and go from there.
Yeah, so the surveyors are going, once we get the PO approved, they're gonna try to get in there in the month of April. They're gonna squeeze it in between other jobs. So hopefully we can get it done in April, and then maybe in May you can start to make your trips out here.
Okay. Yeah, so May would be good.
So on-site time, you're probably looking at just one day being able to do it all?
I think we're gonna budget having 2 or 3 days on site just to make sure we get it all done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey. Well, thanks, Bernard. That was very interesting.
Yeah, and thank you. It should be interesting to see how this turns out. I'm gonna stop the screen share, I think. Yeah, this is gonna be fun and looking forward to getting it done. And if any of you all have any questions or, you know, want follow-up info, let me know. I'm happy to provide a copy of this presentation or anything else you want as well.
One question, Bernard. Is it possible to join you for an hour or so out there when you're doing this?
Oh, yeah, that's no problem.
Okay. I would enjoy doing that. This is Mike.
Yep.
Okay.
You're gonna help Mike, or you're gonna talk to him the whole time?
Oh, I want to observe. I've never been
He'll
around this. It's just
He'll
very,
stand on the edge and watch.
I'm a very quiet person, John.
Well, I don't know, what is the next question I should be asking or we should be doing here?
Well, I think we can move on to the next agenda item if there are no more questions of Mr. Hausen.
Okay.
Well, I think
Thank you, Bernard.
I'll call it a meeting then. So
All right, just in time for 5 o'clock.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard.
Yes.
So he's looking at being back in April, and is it PBS that's doing the survey?
It will likely be Anderson Perry.
Oh, okay. Well, good. Let us know when that's been completed, and it's interesting.
So the next item on the agenda is the certified local government grant. And we've had a couple of months to think about this, and so I'd like to hear if the HPC has any recommendations for what to apply for.
Now, would this have to do with how we're going to pay for the survey, or
No.
this?
This is an upcoming grant cycle, so a new project.
Okay.
So, John, I have honestly been thinking about something that I think would be very interesting for College Place in general, and that is signs concerning College Avenue, and just a little historical deal that it was once called Roosevelt Highway, and how it was laid out with the intent of the Italian truck farmers to sell their goods along that road. And that's where 40-some businesses went up, and it, just some plaques along College Avenue would be, a historical highlight.
Would those be attached to like a street lamp post or
They
something?
could be, yeah.
I think that would dovetail very nicely into the idea of taking the story maps from the inventory that we did a couple years ago,
Right.
and so there could be a number of informational signs that are put up along College Avenue or anywhere in College Place where you want to point out a historical, place of significance that might have
Right.
stood there. And yeah, we can work on locations that could be mounted on existing signage if the existing signs in the right location, or we can put up new signs. We have to be careful about not putting up too many signs. We
Right.
have so much room, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking maybe 3 the entire length of College Avenue and just 1 at the north end, south end, and in the middle, and just talk about what, historically significant sites were there.
Do we have do we know that? I mean,
We
like,
do.
we do, okay.
Yeah. Yep.
As far as applying for grants and so on, this would be through the state. If we did not apply for anything, would we lose our position to apply for something next year or anything like that, John?
No, they have a grant cycle every year, so we they're competitive grants, but they're not. There's not a lot of cities don't apply for them, so they're not that competitive.
Yeah.
They're usually pretty easy to get if you got a decent project.
Yeah. Well, I know that we talked about this several meetings ago, and I haven't thought of anything else that might be worthy of applying for a grant. Even what Mike is talking about, I wonder, something like that and having signage made locally and so forth wouldn't seem to be a very expensive thing to do. But I don't know. Is that something we would apply for, say, $600 or something, and then I don't know.
You'd be surprised how expensive it gets. I mean, I think we would probably be in the $3,000 to $5,000 range by the time you buy the posts and installation costs, and some of that you can the city can get reimbursed for, like, the public works time for installation, things like that.
Huh.
Yeah.
And I know Dan Clark with 2020 was paying $2,800. That was his cheap signs. So they're spendy.
Oh yeah, if you get into like a bronze plaque, then you're talking
Right.
3, 4. I mean, it could, depending on the size, it can be very expensive.
Yeah.
A bronze plaque might be a tempting item for somebody to make way with. That's the other thing I was thinking. A simple metal sign that's been photo engraved or whatever. I have no idea what those would cost, but perhaps even having a duplicate kept in storage for when the other one gets bashed or battered or stolen would be a good idea. But I had no idea they'd be that expensive, so
Yeah.
I apologize.
It depends on how many signs we do, and and the size of them. Whether you want, like on College Avenue, we have a standard for like black painted, signposts and things like that. So anytime you throw color on something, it drives up the cost.
Right.
So is there a minimum for these DAP grants that you have to go to for, or is there a limit?
I don't believe there is a minimum amount.
Okay. Well, I would think for 3 or 4 signs, it's going to cost you well over 10 grand.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, we can probably do better than that.
Okay.
All of the wayfinding signs that we did, I mean, granted, they're just, directional signs. We did it for, yeah, there's some companies out there that are pretty
Okay.
good.
I believe there's one up in the Seattle area called Fireform. And you go online and see what they've done. And, some of them are very extensive. They've been used in, zoos and other historical areas that can go into great detail or just, small and minimal. But it's supposed to be signage that is long lasting. This is just, I'm thinking out loud. This Mike's idea might actually be an interesting one. I just wonder if it's something we should not necessarily apply for a grant for now, but wait until the book is completed and then come up with the next project we're going to do, and then apply for a grant when we know the parameters of what our next project is. Any comment?
No comment.
I think that this might define what our next project would be.
Applying for the grant first might define
Right.
what our project will be.
I think, in other words, if we get this grant, the fulfillment of it would be the next project, essentially, following the book.
Yeah, we would word it in such a way that, I mean, the main emphasis would be the research that we did and making signs out of the wayfinding signs out of the storyboards, the properties that we did on this with the storyboards. And then, we'll come up with a total number of signs and, work kind of backwards that way. We wouldn't have to identify what would be on each sign to apply for the grant. Or the material of the sign. I mean, we'll have to get a ballpark idea from a sign company. A company we've used in the past is Zemar, I think. And they make, their aluminum signs, like street signs, and the material, it's like a vinyl type of material that they put on there that is designed to be out in exposed weather for extended number of years. And they are also, that company in particular is very good about working with the city on the design of them, so we don't have to try to do that in-house. So there's other companies out there that do similar things.
Well, I want to be able to advance the agenda here. Is this something we need to go ahead and vote on then, whether we should make application for a grant? Do we say how much we think we need or anything at all like that?
I think just a recommendation, or that, yeah, maybe a motion. I don't know. Carolyn, do you have an opinion on that? You're the clerk.
Well, it's not in the action items as what.
Oh, right.
I thought you guys were gonna decide what you wanted to apply for the grant.
Can you just
I
call
would
it
think we
a
would.
grant?
Ed, go ahead.
Just call it a research grant for, relating to signage or something on that order.
I think you ought to go for a grant. And I think as long as you have that going, you have a placeholder, and they're going to ask, no doubt, how much you're looking for. So, you know, I guess I would find out what the sign, just an average 2x3 sign or 2x2 sign would cost. And
You
go
know,
from
one thing comes to mind with this, as far as the subject matter. The book covers a lot of different things. And let's say that there's places are identified in the book that were of interest to people that happen to read it. And so what you're doing is you're going around and placing signs that relate to the subjects in the book. So
Right.
it's just kind of just a takeoff from what we're already doing.
So I guess my question is, what kind of authorization, if any, does this commission need to provide for this grant application to proceed?
Usually we have to get authorization from the council, but I think, I mean, I'm just looking at the calendar actually, and the grant's due on the 23rd. And
Of March or April?
of April,
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
which is the day before our next meeting, or the day after our next meeting. So, Carolyn, is there any, I mean, is there a problem with them making a recommendation to apply for the grant?
No, we can just say recommend to council to apply for the grant for et cetera, whatever you're saying, and then have a first, a second, and then.
So like a motion that would authorize the staff to make an application for a CLG grant for historic signage in College Place.
Motion to recommend,
Motion to recommend.
yes.
So I make a motion to recommend
To the council.
to the council a application to be sent to DAP for GLC funding for signage.
What did you say for PLC funding?
GLC,
GLC,
yeah, for signage, historic signage.
okay.
For signage identifying historic places within the
Right.
city limits of College Place.
Yep.
Okay. Does staff have that written down? If you do you want to read that back for us, please?
Yeah. Motion to recommend to council an application to be sent to DAP for GLC funding for historic signage identifying historic places within the city of College Place.
It's CLG.
Oh, CLG, sorry.
CLG,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, so we have a motion. It's been read, corrected. Is this where I would ask everyone to vote?
We have to have a second. I'm Stanley Green. I second the motion.
Okay. We have motion. It's been seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Nay. Sorry, I think we're not quite ready for this, but I am the only vote saying no, so I guess that means it passes, correct?
You are declining? You're saying no?
I said no.
Okay, so it's 3-1. It does pass because it's majority.
Right, okay. So that has passed, and so we will have staff make that application. Good luck, guys. And is there anything, I'm looking here on the agenda. Is there any other item?
Next is the 75th anniversary book update.
Oh,
Yep,
thank you, Mike. You want to give us a report?
I will. So, number one on the deal is Gary and I did meet, in fact, several times. And I was having some computer glitches that we're putting together a little more information, and we looked at all the photos, and we're looking for some names. So we will be getting that. I'm adding a little bit more to the bibliography of the book, turning more up-to-date events that have affected College Place in the last year and a half. And then it will be done. And so I will have all that into you by the end of this month.
Thank you, Mike. Anyone have any questions of him?
Mike, we had asked that you take another look at kind of the past year or so, the parts where you wrote about the last year in the pandemic, and
Right.
has that been revisited?
Yes, it has.
Okay.
Yep. So what I did was that's what I'm adding to the bibliography are news reports from credible news organizations and exactly what happened and how that has affected what goes on in this neck of the woods in College Place. So, and it has.
So this is part of what you'll be submitting for the commissioners to review in the next month, more or less?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yep. That's it.
Okay.
Any other questions of anyone? If there are none, I guess we should go ahead and close the meeting after we've set the time for our next meeting.
The next meeting will be on April 23rd, April 22nd
Okay.
at 4 p.m.
All right.
Okay. Well, is that a meeting that we will still be doing by Zoom, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll see each other then. Thank you very much. I hereby close this meeting.
We
Done.
need a first and a second for closing the meeting at 5:13.
I hear first.
Move that we adjourn.
Okay, and a second? Anybody?
Second.
Second. Thank you, Edward. Okay.
And the meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gonna have to read Robert's Rules of Order again.